Welcome to the lesson on educational short form content. I'm going to have a frigging deep dive into this today. So I know a lot of the people who've come through the course are, experts in a field, a maven if you will, and they want to share the knowledge with people in the community. So that's what we're going to look at today. So the actionable takeaways, we're going to explain the pitfalls of education in short form content, and we're going to look at why most people are failing with short form content when it's education based, and then we're going to learn the perfect structure for any educational content. So let's get friggin' stuck in, eh? I'm going to preface this by saying educational content is super hard, and it's probably the hardest win online, especially when done incorrectly. It's not something that I do a lot of with short form. I tend to prefer long form for education, short form for entertainment, and we'll look at a little bit about the differences between those in this lesson, and how if you do still want to pursue short form educational content, how you can look to do that. But it's really, really difficult. And I think it's difficult for quite a few reasons. One, I think that most education creators are lazy when it comes to short form content. Because you'll be really confident in your ability and your knowledge, you just think that emanates and that other people will be aware of that as well, and they won't be, and so you're addressing a cold audience, and a lot of the time in something that they don't even necessarily know they want to be educated on. So what you tend to do is you tend to just make loads of talking head videos, talking in depth about things that you find interesting and just hope that other people find interesting, or that you find informative and think that that'll be enough that people will just resonate with it. But without packaging it and positioning it correctly, that just isn't the case. One of the biggest obstacles is that people are just there to be entertained for the most part. If you've been at school or university or college or whatever all day and you've been lectured all day, the last thing you want to do when you switch off and you pick your phone up and you're scrolling mindlessly is probably be lectured at again. You're there to be entertained for the most part, and that means straight away, like I say, it's a difficult win. That said though, people don't feel upset if they are educated in something or they do learn something after the fact, as long as it's embedded within something more interesting, or as long as it's digestible enough that they can get through the video. I'm going to look a little bit about how you're going to package that and how you're going to position that a little bit later. The other thing is that nobody cares about you yet. They might care about you in the future if you can get them to care about you and you provide enough value. But a cold audience, they don't know that you're an expert in something, so they just don't care about you. And it isn't enough for you to know, and it isn't enough even to have a million accolades outside of the short form platform, because it kind of means nothing to them as they're scrolling. They're not going to sort of go and do that research on you or understand that. You're up against it from the outset. So then you think, well, how do I combat that? And one way to combat that is you tell people what you know. But the thing is, the way that people approach it is they tend to list accolades. Now, listing accolades, and I know this from experience, listing a long list of accolades of things that you're really proud of, it does tend to make people respect you, but it tends to make people not like you at all. So, you have to be more surreptitious in that approach, and you can't just reel off all the things that you're super good at and better than them at, because that just doesn't make you a very likable human being. And one of the biggest things, certainly in sales, is likability. That's like a massive impulse trigger. So you have to approach it in a way that is slightly more delicate than just listing a load of accolades to people. Let's look a little bit about how long form and short form differ, and the pitfalls of both of them and the strengths of both of them as well. So the issues with long form. Long form is better for education, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that why. But the biggest issue is the platforms that allow long form, like YouTube, for example, you have to also learn about the psychology of the click and the thumbnail and title strategies. So, like this thumbnail there, for example, it's a lady called Nell, and that there this is an untested thumbnail, by the way, and it's really simple just for the benefit of this, but that straight away it's using cognitive dissonance, because people think that meditation makes you happier and you're challenging the norm, and there's so much psychology that goes into that that looks like quite a simple thumbnail, and it is. It's intentionally simple, but there's quite a lot of thought goes into it, and the same with the title. And a lot of the time you need to be informed by your thumbnail and your title to then script or make the video, because the way that you approach the introduction to that video is going to be based on what they expect from what the title and the thumbnail have suggested. Straight away, you've got an added layer of complexity with long form than you do to short form, where it just appears and it just happens. You know, people are more intentional. They're going to think, do I want to spend my time watching that? And does that interest me before they even watch it? So even the best videos, if no one clicks on them, nobody sees them. And the other thing is, they're just a frigging nightmare to edit. And if you go for sort of retention-based editing, then they become really complex and really time-consuming. And if you go for sort of more relaxed editing, then you have to sort of be really confident on camera, and you have to look really professional, and you have to sort of have all these other things. Your set has to maybe look good. And I'm not suggesting that you have to go and buy expensive equipment and things, but you have to, take that psychology into sort of consideration, so that when you're making these and editing these videos, you have credibility straight away when people are watching it. Again, when you think about the things we've spoke about in the other lessons, if it's taking hours and hours, and I've not really experimented a lot with my long form stuff for this particular project, but I have in the past. I've done things that are really niche, and we've had some success on YouTube in long form, but it's almost unsustainable unless you've got a team behind yours, at least somebody to edit, because editing takes all the time, and it's kind of like one of the things that doesn't really sort of move the needle at all. Straight away, the process behind creating long form is really arduous, and it becomes, quite complex, and that straight away makes it difficult. But the strengths of it, though, if we talk about the strengths of it are, if you are going to talk about something that's quite in depth, you probably need more time to describe it than what you can in a short form video. If you're going to educate somebody, like when I worked in education, you're doing it over a year. You're looking at things holistically and not over just a short period of time. So when you're thinking about that, long form has the strength there, because people go into it knowing that they're in it for the long haul, and that they're more patient with you, and you have more time to describe things that are more complex. So like, if you're talking about something, let's say you specialize in something like addiction or something, you almost don't want to minimize that, because it's really, really important that you get to the meat of the matter, if you like, and get stuck into that. So long form has a strength in that sense, in that you can, if you do get your packaging right, you do get your editing right, you have plenty of time to talk about things, and you have plenty of opportunity to really sell what you're talking about before people even go into it. So the expectation going into it is, we're going to learn a particular thing, which means that we've already made that decision as an audience that we're prepared to listen. It almost warms the audience up a little bit, so that's like a big strength. Now, the issues with short form education, and I've spoke about a few of them already, leading up to this. The big thing is, it often goes against my system. The things that we've been speaking about already, you can see that they already contradict what we know works in short form content. The other thing is, like, when you're an expert, you tend to talk in jargon, and you tend to talk in riddles to most people, and you have to actually talk to people like they've got a reading age of 5. And you're not necessarily dumbing it down because the person you're talking to is too stupid to understand it. You're dumbing it down because their entry level is a lot lower than what you normally communicate in. So like, if you're talking to other professionals, you'll be using loads of jargon, and you'll be talking expert to expert. Quite often you're aiming your content at beginners, which is another thing, because anyone who knows a little bit about it might not appreciate beginner level stuff. Anybody who knows nothing about it, if you get into the jargon and stuff, they're not going to be interested. And it becomes hard to pitch, which I haven't put on my list, but that's another big thing. It becomes really difficult who you're pitching it at. And if we're trying to cast a wide net, the widest net is probably beginners, but then automatically you're going to turn off people who do know a little bit about it or a lot about it, or you're going to open yourself up to some sort of conflict or debate. So that's another thing that makes it really difficult. So the other big issue that I see all the time with educational based content creators is that, they'll be an expert in the area they're in, but they're not an expert in education. So what they want to do is they want to tell people about the thing, but they don't ever want to show them. And like in education, we call it differentiation of learning. Different learners learn in different ways. And they used to have this thing called VAC, visual, audio, and kinesthetic learners. I think they've kind of poo-pooed it now in education, but yeah, I still think it's a pretty good way of looking at it, in that when you think about different people will absorb information in different ways. Some people will like things really visual. Some think people will like just that face-to-face audio kind of transfer, and some people will actually want to go and do it themselves. So like you might want to show them how to do it themselves. It's one thing that you kind of see baking channels that are doing well do quite well, because they'll show the product, they'll show what it should look like, they'll say this is like the characteristics of it, they'll say this is how you make it, and they'll talk you through it, but they'll show you it as well, and then they encourage you to go and make it. They tend to do really well on platform, but when you think about it, that's why, because you know it's visual and it's also appealing to all different learning needs. The other thing is they want to script it, which takes forever, and that's fair enough. You know, I don't tend to script things. I know what you're thinking, I can friggin' tell, you probably should start. But I don't tend to script things, I tend to have a prompt, and again, I'm from an education background, so this is kind of how we would have worked at times. So I suppose that's why I gravitate towards this. I wouldn't necessarily do this for short form. I don't know that it would work. Maybe it would. I've never tried it. Maybe that's something that could be tested. But again, you know, test it. If it don't work, move on. So I suppose in a nutshell, when I'm talking about this, like one of the barriers to this is you're not only trying to learn how to make great content that resonates, you're actually trying to learn how to educate people as well. And I think people really forget that. And if you go onto YouTube and you go onto all these platforms and you listen to all these people that are talking about social media and long form and how to be successful on YouTube and things like that, none of them ever talk about actually how you educate somebody. They only really ever talk about how you make the content that could potentially educate somebody, or cameras and lighting and things like that, which are all important, don't get me wrong. But that's only one of two skill sets. You're almost becoming a dual professional because, well, more so because you've got your profession, you've got the idea now that you're going to be creating content, which is another sort of string to your bow, and then you've got to actually learn how to educate people as well, which is really difficult. All these things stacked make this difficult, right? So let me give you a bit of a simple 3-step process of how you should probably approach laying out your content in terms of its structure, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat about how we should apply it. So it's called the Education Map, MAP. Let's start with the M, main question, and it's the main question that your audience is asking. And just as a bit of an example, I saw a psychologist, she'd been making videos, it wasn't someone I'd worked with, she wasn't necessarily getting a lot of views. She used the word narcissist, and then all of a sudden it just kind of exploded. And then all the content from there forward, she used the word narcissist. So if I was to experiment with YouTube in the future, which I probably will, it'll be trying to find the words that resonate and the ideas that resonate, and it'll all come from like what's the main question. So like the example here, will this system, you know, from my advert, will this system work for any niche? So once you know that main question, what you need to do then is you need to move to the A, which is authority, and it's embedding that credibility to why you're the right person, like I've spoke about. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't feel braggy, like I mentioned. If you do it the wrong way, people might respect you, but they just won't frigging like you, and they won't want to listen to you. So you need to build trust to keep the audience engaged. Again, looking at the advert, well, with over 20 million views across TikTok, which is true, you know, it has to be true. And, you know, working with a lot of people, I've noticed a lot of trends, and I've noticed a formula that works, and this is where we are. And, you know, it's all true, but it's about embedding that credibility and letting you know that actually, you know, you've got this question and I can help you, and this is why I can help you. The P then is prove it. So you'll see this throughout my education-based content, and I use metaphor and story all the time. So to make points relatable and memorable, and if you think about it, I do this all the time in this course, and this example's taken straight from that. So to explain the problem, we need to learn to bake. If we're baking chocolate chip cookies, we're baking oatmeal cookies, we're still just baking frigging cookies. So what you need to do is make a frigging Battenberg. You're making the same video over and over again. Now, the biggest thing with the prove it is you have to leave the point that you're making till right at the end. And people do this in list form content all the time. They'll go, number one is you've got to stop making the same video. And then people go, all right, cool, what's number two? And then you'll start going, so the reason that is, and they've already clicked onto number two. So the way you've got to do it is you've got to explain why first, using maybe something like a metaphor or a story, because that helps retention. And then at the back end of it, you say, and the reason that that's important is because of this. And it's really important that you do it that way, or people will be gone. But you have to make it visual, right? So with all that in mind, once you know your main question, once you've embedded your authority and you're making your point, throughout all of that, you have to make it visual. It can't just be telling the people those things. So yeah, okay, when you're kind of planning it, it would be looking at it like these things. And the example prompts are all audible, things that I'd be saying, but I'd be making it visual. I'd be, using the cookies and they'd be there. And there's a guy that I followed for a lot of years online in the fitness sort of niche, and I've seen the evolution of his content. He was making fitness content in his gym, and, he was talking about lifting weights and things like that. And he'd also talk about nutrition. And then one day he set it in the kitchen instead, and he used butter to represent the calories and the food that he was referring to and the nutrition he was referring to, and it just exploded. And he made it visual, he contextualized it better, but also he found, just that pocket that people really cared about, that main question, because he thought, up until then, it was they wanted to see him in the gym lifting weights and learn how to lift those weights. But actually, it was more impressive what he was doing in the kitchen, because they knew how to lift the weights, but they couldn't stick to the diet. So you have to make it visual, but you have to make it the right video as well, the right concept, like with all of this, like we spoke about throughout it. Simple planning, what's the big question? Hone in on a subset of the wider topic once you find it. Like I say, like he was talking about fitness, but he found if he spoke about this particular bit of nutrition, worked really well. Embed authority, but almost as a throwaway comment. Like I say, don't be braggy, just embed it in there as part of the conversation. Throw it in like it's a throwaway comment. And the best way to do it is through story. Everything's done through story, like I say. So you're saying, oh yeah, well recently I've done 20 million views on TikTok, like I have, and I've been working with a lot of people, and and so forth. And then demonstrate your point. Don't just tell them it. Demonstrate it, show it, and then make it so that they feel like they could go do it too. Make it feel relatable and make it feel achievable. That's another big thing, making it feel achievable. So my final thought on this is that you need to make this a hybrid between the system and what we've just spoke about, because I still think that this is the hardest win, even with now what you know. I still think this is a hard win. So by all means test it, but if you can find a way to just embed the relevant information into a concept that is far bigger than the brand, and package it like we spoke about, but still embed your trust, your credibility and all that education, but put it into that format, it'll do far better than if you just try and approach it with this alone, almost like borrowing from long form content on the short form platforms. Because like I say, it's not what people are necessarily there for. They'll accept it if it's done right, but if it's not done right, they'll just be a little bit upset. And then my final point, I know I said that was going to be my frigging final point, but this is my final point. One trap that you can fall into, if you're doing something like technology or something that, like synth and modular and things like that, what can happen is you end up chasing trends, and you chase new products, you want to buy new products to get in there first. And a lot of these people that are more established might be getting sent them. So just know that eventually you might get there, but initially you might end up spending loads of money, and that again, that's probably not a great business model. So that's what I'll end on. But give it a go, see what you come up with.